This episode is for those of you who find yourself staying small. You're someone who wants to take up space. You want to express yourself. You want to offer what it is you have to offer, yet you're met with some sort of resistance. You feel yourself feeling like you have to hide, feeling like it's not safe enough to speak up, feeling like it's not okay to be seen. If this speaks to you, if you can resonate, then this episode is for you. I'm joined by Julie Hughes, and the two of us explore our patternings that are rooted in needing to stay small. And we do some explorations around, the edges of what shows up when we play with this idea of taking up a bit more space, or what shows up in these realms of where we're comfortable. And how can we play with understanding our survival patterns a little bit more by actually panning out and seeing more of the ancestral impact and how our intergenerational trauma might be influencing the reasons why we play small and stay small. I also offer up a little exploration on how you can play with your actual physical body in the realms of getting small and taking up space to help you understand more of what shows up. So, if you want to get curious, I encourage you to have a listen, follow along, and see how what Julie and I share can help you in understanding your own patterning a little bit more and help you to also maybe ride some waves and discover how you, like Julie, find a way to actually take up more space and reprogram the way your brain and your body relate to this idea of taking up space. So have a listen and see where it takes you. A big thank you to Julie for being willing to play with those edges, ride some waves, and I'm so stoked that there's more space for us all to take up, and I'm excited for all of you to have a listen and to see what happens when you play in these realms of taking up more space. For me, staying small is something that I've been navigating for a really long time. So I'm excited to have you be willing enough to not stay small to actually join me today, Julie. So
Really
thank you
enough.
for being here. Yeah. It's like,
Thanks for advice. Yeah.
if I stay small, then I don't have to show up. It's fine.
I mean, the dilemma was in the request was do I respond? Because if I don't respond, I'm staying small. But if I do, then I'm, breaking out of that. So,
Yeah, exactly. And that's something I want to invite people listening into is like recognize where those edges are, where we hold ourselves back, and when do we have the capacity to actually challenge those edges or explore those edges versus, oh no, I need to stay small here because this feels like too much. So I'm glad that this didn't feel like too much. Yeah.
and a large part of it is because it's you. And
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
yeah.
That's a big part of it, feeling safe enough to play with those edges for
Yeah.
sure. So something I want to speak to first is like there are many parts of us at one time, and like both of us have the ability to be here, to be practitioners, to show up, to be seen, yet there's other parts of us that are like, and that's scary as fuck, hell no, I'm gonna stay small, I'm gonna stay hidden. And that's what I really want to invite us and those listening to explore is like to recognize that a big part of you might be like, I have so much to offer and I want to be seen and I want to put myself out there, where something else is like hard no, brakes on, that's too risky. And what we're playing with ultimately is like, how do we work as a team with these parts of us so that we can explore those edges in a way where it doesn't feel like a life threat to the part that is like, "Ooh, this is too much," while also honoring this feeling we might have of like wanting to show up and wanting to offer what we have to offer. So, um,
Yeah.
I think that's important to name for us to see the many parts at play, because my guess is you too have this part of you that does want to be seen, that does want to. So let's speak to that first for the fun of it. Like,
Okay.
the part of you that does have something to offer, that wants to be seen, that wants to take up space. What do you notice about that?
Yeah, I guess first of all, right now, I notice all parts. They're all present with me in this
Uh-huh.
moment.
I figured so much.
Yeah, I can feel them. So, but I
Even
guess what's
even
that?
bringing attention to the part that wants to stand up
Oh,
makes the other ones
totally.
louder, like, no, no,
Yeah,
no, no,
they're
no.
just like they're all rearing their heads. They're beautiful, lovely heads. But I think what I'm as you were talking, what I was reflecting on was that what feels different for me that maybe in the past, like I wouldn't have said yes to an interview like this. What feels different is I feel like there's a container for all those parts, right? Like that they're all kind of being held in this container of safety, or even if I'm feeling a little anxious and my heart rate's going up or I'm nervous, like nothing bad's actually happening. Like I'm okay, right? So I guess something feels a bit neutralized, and then that part that you're naming, the part of me that wants to show up and be seen or um, be heard or whatever, right? Like, or knows that I have some degree of professionalism that I can provide or skill or whatever is like um, the fear is also getting translated into like excitement. So those,
Mm,
yeah. So both those parts are there and they're almost like equal right now, right? Like, yeah,
yeah. Cool. I like it. I like
yeah,
it. Yeah, for me, when I'm in a container with like someone I know or when I'm in my groups or anything like that, like it's so much easier to be in that space of like, oh, I can take up space here and be okay. So I'm noticing that with you, that sense of like, oh, I can take up space. And then when I think bigger of like, and people are listening, then there's this, then the other part gets louder, like,
right. Yeah. What do I sound like? And what are they thinking? And
yeah,
yeah, all
yeah.
the fear response. Yeah, yeah,
Totally, totally. So I can relate to you with that container in a few different ways, both the container I hold for my many different parts, but also the container you and I are holding and how that creates a sense of safety for us to, show up together in these edges. Whereas, um, yeah, when I think beyond that container, that's when the other parts get louder for me. It's like, oh, I can feel them, they're there. But if I just think of the smaller container in between you and I, it's like, we're good.
yeah. We're yeah, if we were in a live audience right now, like the Oprah Winfrey show or something,
Yeah,
I would just be either completely mute or rambling because that would feel really intimidating to have everyone's actual eyes on me, right? Like that. So yeah, to your point, this feels a lot safer because there's this small container that we're working within, and then
yeah,
a bigger one that's less visible in this moment.
exactly, exactly. So as long as we
Yeah,
don't put our attention too wide, and it's
right,
okay. We don't think about being on stage with Oprah, we're good.
yeah,
And like you name, like, thank goodness for our survival patterns of being able to still navigate situations like that, where it's like, well, then I'll just shift into like, I'm disconnected from myself, but I can talk really fast and I can just ramble and tell you all the things, or I'm utterly frozen and can't talk at
yeah,
all, right? So that's the joys of doing this work, I feel, is like recognizing these different layers that show up and how do we start to get curious about these layers that are there so we can untangle more of what's at the core of it all so that there is a bigger container for us to actually show up in. Like you said, you know, in the past, there's no way that this would have been doable. And this is something I think is important to recognize where it's not just like, yeah, wave the magic wand and everything's different and now you can, take up space and not be afraid and do whatever. It's like layer by layer,
yeah.
there's more room to be able to show up. Yeah. And what's cool is we've in a way named the smaller container, which allows us to feel more safe, which for me, I feel myself soften. I feel myself more connected with you when I tune into that smaller container in between the two of us. And then when I tune into the bigger container, I can feel my spine get a bit more rigid. I put on more of a performance act.
Yeah.
Like there's
Yep.
and I want to invite those listening to think about the same thing. Like, where do you feel safe to show up and to take up space? And then what's that transition and that shift? So, do you want to share a little bit about for you if we think outside of this container? And I mean, we talked about stage on, on the stage with
Stage
Oprah,
fright. Yeah,
but
yeah. I don't know why Oprah's coming to mind. Maybe.
oh, because it's Oprah,
So yeah,
it's
she takes up a lot of
she
space in a
takes
good
up a
way,
lot of
right?
space. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Which can sometimes hold a sense of safety for some people, but it can also be again, yeah, bigger picture.
Mhm.
So what I'm drawn to for both of us to first explore is that transition from like feeling safe enough to take up some space to
Yeah.
what happens when it feels like a risk. There's something
Hmm.
that, indicates more alarm bells for us, and there's
Right.
something that's perceived as a threat, and then our physiology changes.
Yeah.
So, what do you notice in that contrast?
Yeah. I'm certainly experiencing that as you're talking, and I'm like, I'm tracking my nervous system. So when I think of a larger container, if we were in a live audience, it's instant like arousal and the fear response, right? I'm like the yeah, just the sympathetic rising, also feeling like dry mouth, which I imagine if like that's where the the lack of being able to speak would occur, I'm really to your point, I can really picture and feel that edge. And it's kind of like it's not a solid edge, it's sort of yeah, it's like a contraction and then an expansion. It's got some movement to it, but I know when I'm on the other side of it where it feels like fear and something bad's gonna happen, as opposed to when I can like be in the small container with you, connect, remember the safety. It's like, no, it's all good. Like you're safe, you're okay. And then yeah. So yeah, it kind of has like an echo, if that makes sense, or
Yeah.
yeah, an echo
And
of the first, probably. Yeah.
totally, totally. An echo and the ability to shift in between those, like there's
There's like
almost a natural pendulating happening of like a little bit out there, coming back
yeah,
in, a little bit out there, coming back in. Yeah,
yeah,
I can relate to that too. So I want to invite both of us to even play with this for a second, and anyone that's listening that can relate to this transition you make from being, in a space where it feels like you can take up some space to that edginess where there's some riskiness. If we even just take a moment to play, like moving towards the riskiness and then back into the smaller container. Like for me, it feels like, yeah, it's like whoom, present here. I feel us both, and then I feel me disconnecting from you a little. Similar to
right,
you, heart rate increases a little more hypervigilance comes online of like looking around, and then I can come back into connection with you. And
yeah,
this is something that we learn in somatic experiencing with both Julie and I are somatic experiencing practitioners, is this dance in between like that we naturally do in between like, ooh, the edge of scary or, uh, a little bit activating to back into connection. And when we learn to listen to our body, we can really find these edges where there's this natural shifting that's occurring. And when
yeah,
we notice that, that's an opportunity where we can actually ride through a little wave or be in an experience without it feeling like too scary. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. And
mhm,
sometimes after something like that, our container, our ability to take up more space gets bigger.
mhm,
And I'm talking because I know you and I are both playing in those edges.
totally.
And like,
Yep, as you speak, yeah,
as I'm
yeah,
speaking. And hopefully
present,
those listening are also kind of
yeah,
aware of that shift that can naturally happen, or we can make it happen where we think
right,
about the edge, we come closer to it, or we settle back in to where we
mhm,
feel sense of connection is a place where we can, be a little more present.
right,
And then I'm consciously shifting versus us like
right.
pendulating a little in that like echo that you talked about. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think one thing that's coming up for me as you were talking was around these edges is that it's like my relationship to discomfort has changed, right? So like
Mm.
even though like yes, when I go to that bigger place and I expand and into the fear, it's like it's not comfortable, like that never feels good. And yet what's different for me is that the discomfort isn't automatically hooked into a story, automatically hooked into that heightened fear that like something bad, something horrible. Like there's an ability in that to be like, yeah, it's a little uncomfortable, but I'm like, it's okay to feel this. Like so there actually feels like there's room and space to still be like present in my body and talking to you and feel the discomfort, as opposed to like in the past that would have like rocket launched me out of my body
Yeah.
into paralysis or wherever, right? Yeah.
Or into talking
Yeah.
really fast and
We're
yeah,
into talking
fast.
really fast,
Yeah.
but totally in a disembodied way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so great. That's what I love about this work is it's so subtle but also so profound, the impacts it can have in just really building our capacity and showing us that the threat that we once perceived is actually no longer there.
Yeah,
Even
like
though,
the tiger is actually a kitten or something,
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So we could stay with this, but I want to almost shift gears a little and look at it from a slightly different perspective where, we've played a little with pausing and noticing how we're experiencing ourselves in this staying small. We're well aware of our edges and what shows up there, and we brought some curiosity to that. But I almost want to look at the bigger picture because at least this has been my experience and I'm guessing yours and I know many other people as well that this experience of staying small often feels intergenerational or even from past lives for those that work in those realms. And I want to almost pan out a little to take some time to recognize the bigger picture of the patterns we have that keep us within our edges of what feels safe and comfortable. And, what we're speaking to here is being seen, taking up space, whatever that may look like, because it can look like so many different things. But I want to shift it by us. I mean, for me, when I acknowledge the history that's involved in me staying small, I feel a lot more spaciousness and grace for my experience of it. Anything you want to name around as we shift gears into that?
Hmm. It's interesting. I almost initially felt more like pressure than spaciousness. Maybe the
Uh,
pressure of the lineage, right?
yeah.
Like of that. Oh yeah, yeah. And I can shift out of that, but it feels like it's weighted. Yeah,
Mm,
you know? Yeah, this has a history to it.
yeah. Can
Yeah.
you describe that a bit more in the weightedness? Does it feel like their weight or pressure on you to do different or yeah, how would you describe that weight a little bit more?
Uh, Good question. Um, and again, I think the pressure I'm looking at it now, I'm like, it's not that it's good or bad, right? Again, it's just a sensation or
Yeah.
a visual for me, but it also there is, I think, because of how far back it goes intergenerationally, particularly with the women, right, in my family line. Um, the pressure is the contraction is the like what I'm contending with, right? And I don't want to say fighting up against because I don't feel like I have to fight it, but it's like that going big or being seen and taking up space often comes with a bit of that backlash, which I guess is what the pressure feels like. The pressure is to stay small because it's so deeply rooted with safety
Yeah.
and beyond mine, right? Like even could have even been life or death safety at
Yeah.
some point,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. I like it. So it's almost like you're getting a flavor of the pressure
Mhm.
that or the pressure, we're speaking more somatically, not I mean, there's probably pressure, peer pressure, all that entangled in it too, but the sensation of pressure that probably has been felt for generations and the awareness of the impact of that. Yeah. This
Yeah.
question keeps coming up, so I want to ask it because I find that it can be helpful.
Yeah.
Sometimes information comes through. I know for me, I've had a lot of intergenerational stuff show up, and I'll just sit with an experience, and then boom, there it is. And it's information comes through, and it's like, then I'll work with it how I know how to work with it from, threat response cycle. And in a way, what I'm always curious about is what's the root of this? Like, how far back did this first the pressure of staying small and the somatic feeling of "Ooh, I need to stay small, stay quiet, stay hidden, you know, see if there's an answer to this. If that pressure had a story to tell on where it originated from or on, anything it wants to share on why it wants to be like this, is there anything that shows up?
The first sort of thought that comes to mind, which isn't a fully formed thought, so there could be
That's
some
usually normal when it's
unresolved.
coming from so
Yeah,
far away.
yeah, or it's like, oh, I gotta time travel for a minute there. No,
Exactly.
um, I think the flavor of it is it has to do with like, so it's personal safety. Like staying small is often, a pretty good way to like keep yourself alive. And some, I think of animals that do
Yeah.
that. I'm picturing like a hedgehog or any, snail or any animal that can kind of hide inwards and blend in to their environment, right? Like it has a pretty good chance of survival, rather than if it like, you know, pokes its head out and yeah, is more vulnerable to being exposed. So there's that piece. And then the other part, again, that's not a fully formed thought, but it's showing up in so maybe it's coming from somewhere, is in protection of others. So I
Mm,
don't know exactly, I'm curious about that, but there's a
yeah.
sense of like, um, and maybe, I don't know, there's a maternal aspect to that. I'm not sure, but it really feels like, um, it's not just about my safety. There's a way in which, yeah,
Yeah.
it
I love it.
feels connected to others.
Yeah, I love it. And this is where it's like we don't necessarily need to know, but we're getting more of an understanding of why the pattern exists, right? So it's like, okay, this isn't just about from a biological perspective of like play small so that you're safe for survival. It's like, how do we also play small or be quiet for the protection of others? And even that piece of information gives us a more of an understanding of the pattern and the reason why it's there, right? And that's why I think it can be. Some people might have received an answer from that kind of question, other people might not. It's like a way for us to inquire into why the pattern exists, however old it is. And it allows us to get more insight. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And our relationship with the pattern can start to change, and when we see that bigger picture. I know for me, I think that's where that spaciousness exists. It's like, oh, it's easy for me to see the bigger picture. And also I've done a fuck ton of work with some ancestral stuff where I'm like, okay, are there more layers? Damn, there's still more layers, but it's like sometimes something that's been really cool for me when I work through ancestral pieces, there's this shift that happens where it's almost like I feel like they have my back after that. Like we're
Mhm.
in it together. And
Yeah,
it's like, okay, now we can do this differently now because the threat that existed then no longer exists.
hmm.
And we can be in this like yeah, it literally feels like I got an army behind me, just like, oh
Aw,
yeah.
I love that. Yeah,
Now it's my own stuff getting in the way of me showing up. No.
right. You can't blame it on them anymore.
No, I
Yeah,
can't blame it on them anymore.
they're cheering you
Totally,
on.
totally.
Yeah.
Damn it. But yeah, my invitation there for those listening is like, well, how can you look at this pattern of staying small and just hold the bigger picture in our awareness and inquire, like, is there any information that wants to come through about the origin or anything that wants to be seen around this? Because it just allows us to hold it with a different awareness and a different attention and a different intention, even of like, okay, I see how important it was then.
Or like compassion, I guess and I'm getting bits of information coming to me now. I'm like, oh, it could be this, it could be that.
Yes.
There's just ways, and I know the story doesn't matter as much, and it's like, but I can zoom out, as you said, and it creates more spaciousness. And then it's like, well, of course, like, yeah, this pattern makes sense because you could have risked your life or your family's life if you were an outspoken,
Yeah.
opinionated woman in the 18th century. I don't know, right? Like, or
Exactly.
whatever, right?
100%. And this is, I love that more information is coming through for you because to
Yeah,
me, when we open ourselves up to the possibility of it, it's like that information does want to come through to piece together the puzzle more
right. Yeah,
to help transform the
full
belief
picture.
that's still in our cells that,
Yeah.
what they had to do has to be done still today.
It almost, for me, what the feeling is around it, I guess, is it's like an unfreezing, right? Maybe that's the piece too. Like when we're frozen, we don't have access to that information
Yeah.
or it's cut off. And so like, yeah, I keep getting this image of like a thawing. And I actually had this image with my grandmother in a dream where I was pushing her in her wheelchair because she was in a wheelchair towards the end of her life, and I was pushing her through slush. And it was so like it was so telling, and it was just this little moment we shared, and she was smiling with me, and it only occurred to me afterwards where I'm like, yeah, like the slush is melting.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And it's a similar, but then like I'm getting that feeling of the warmth and growing up in Montreal that time of year in the spring where everything started to
Mm.
thaw or unthaw, I should say, right? Or thaw.
Yeah.
Mix up
Thaw,
everything.
thaw,
Thaw.
thaw.
Okay.
Yeah.
But just this like warm and
Mm.
maybe to your point, that reassurance where there's more access to like another reason to see men, right? Like these relationships, these people or people I may have never met, but that, I'm in relationship with something now and it's not um yeah, it's not just me alone in the terror or whatever it might have originally been. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah,
Yeah, it's so cool. Can
yeah.
you tell also as that's happening if the space you take up is almost increasing a little as that thawing's happening, as that warming is happening?
Yeah, because somatically, if I'm tracking it, it's like I can feel a difference in my voice. It's not as like quivery, and I actually can feel like a warmth. So almost some of that fear and anxiety or the sensation of it is sort of transformed into this like pretty warm, but still pretty feeling across my chest. But
You went a
it's
bit
calm.
funny. You went a bit
Oh,
robot there for a
oh,
second.
I
Say
went
that
robotics. There you go.
that last bit
Back.
there.
Um, yeah, so the previous sensation of what I was feeling more of like a fear anxiety response is now a much more like centered, grounded, but almost like whereas before I wasn't really feeling my chest. Now I'm like really feeling it, and it feels very like the energy has just shifted to something that's a lot more pleasant,
Yeah, I feel
not
that
as
in you.
uncomfortable. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's
yeah,
literally like you can take up more space. It's like you're more integrated, more
yeah,
here. Yeah, shoulders seem
yeah,
broader. There's more
yeah.
presence. There's more of a
Right.
landing of like, here I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like another layer has shifted, thawed, and there's more of you that can now be integrated to be here.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's so cool. And that's, all we did was kind of hold space for the bigger picture for
Yeah.
information to come through. And it's kind of like, oh, and the puzzle pieces come into play and there's a deeper understanding and there's
Yeah.
a wave ridden and something shifts. And it's like, how the hell did you describe that?
Physiology response. It's actually, I know, I
Right?
don't,
Like the story that lies in your cells that taking up a little more space for yourself or for others was way too dangerous. And just by acknowledging it and creating a bit of space to see it, it's like, oh wait,
understand it.
that, yeah,
Yeah. Well, it feels, yeah, it's like it's releasing. There's more, less contraction, more of that nice, more spreading feeling. So,
yeah,
yeah.
it's so great. I love
Yeah.
it. And before we started recording, we talked about like the ease of this, right? Like how
Yeah.
we can work in a way where this can be playful, where it can be easy, where doesn't have to be
Right.
so much effort, so much work, or like, and this is where I want to bring in this layer that how we feel towards our patterns, which is already shifted for you. There's more compassion for the need to be small. I find we can get so caught up. I'm saying we as a general statement in this place where we're frustrated with our patterns, where we just want things to be different, where, there can be flavors of like, poor me, or like, I'm so annoyed, or the blame, or the whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's like when we can pan out and see the bigger picture at play, those pieces tend to shift or we become more aware of them. So I'm naming this because for some people, you might not be able to do what Julie just did. You might be stuck in more of this layer of like, yeah, I'm stuck. I see my intergenerational need to, stay small and stay quiet, but I'm frustrated at them. I can't believe they didn't fight. I'm annoyed at them, like how dare them do what they did because that had such an impact on me. Like there's so much, why didn't they stand up for me? There's lots there that can be showing up, and that's more that inner layer of like, the frustration we can have towards our humanness and our
Right.
ancestors' humanness
Mhm.
versus the grace or the compassion we can have for our own humanness
Yeah.
and our ancestors' humanness.
Yeah.
And it just
Mhm.
becomes that much more easier when we find that space. And it's
Mhm.
not always easy for people to land on. And both you and I have been doing this work for some time, you know? And yeah.
Taken some time.
Yeah.
Yeah, what comes up for me around that is like, I guess I think of that as like as resistance, right? Sort of resisting what is, and I'm really familiar with that pattern or like that pattern of self-deprecating or judgment. And again, all of that has enabled the staying small, right? It's all part of that same defense mechanism, but
100%.
it also like resistance, yeah, just reinforces it. Whereas when you're talking about grace, yeah, I think of that as, I mean, you may have said this. I mean, I know originally it was Peter Levine, but it's like that reminder of what he talks about with the compassionate witness, of like shifting away from judgment towards self and other, and like yeah, viewing oneself through that lens of like the compassionate witness, and then it just instantly, the not instantly and not always, but in this moment, it dissolved that tension, right, of like wanting it to be different.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And that made room for the other pieces to come
Yeah,
in, the information to come
naturally on their own.
through.
Yeah, I didn't have
Exactly.
to do anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And I'm sure people listening are like, but how do you get to that spaciousness?
I know.
Well, you can download my
Yeah.
experiential guide to find a
Yeah.
step-by-step process. No.
Yeah. There's no magical solution to it, but yeah.
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 To me, that is the ongoing practice. And what it is acknowledging what is, like you said, right? Like the more we can acknowledge what is, the more we can hold space for the many layers that are at play.
Yeah.
And yeah, sometimes it happens with ease, and sometimes we're in conflict with ourselves, and it's frustrating and it's hard, and we feel like we're
Mhm.
moving backwards and we're small again, and why can't we take up space? And here I am again, still
Yeah. The
unable
yo-yo
to
effect.
speak up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can skip over that. I don't know, right? It feels like
Yeah.
that's a necessary stage to,
I do
yeah.
too. Yeah, I do too. And I think it's a stage that continue. Like I feel like that's always going to be there for us. But the more we can feel the difference of like, oh, here I am in this dynamic. I'm in the dynamic where I'm in conflict with the part of me that wants to stay small. That is like, if you don't stay small, we're all going to die. Like, like not a chance we're doing
Yeah.
this. It's
Yeah.
like, well, if I'm constantly in conflict with that, of course I'm gonna be having a hard time. And of course I also am in conflict with it because it makes sense that I want things to be different,
Something different.
right?
Yeah. Hmm.
So to be able to, at least that's what's been really beneficial to me, is to be able to see the layers at play, to be able to see the compassionate or the empathic witness, to be able to
Hmm.
see how I feel towards my patterns, to see the patterns themselves and how entangled they can be in so many different dynamics. And then at the core of it, the trauma that we're stuck in, that place in the threat response cycle, right? So just being able to map it out to me is like an ongoing practice, and then pausing and noticing like, oh, there I am in conflict with myself, understandably. Oh, there I
Yeah.
am not able to speak up while my mom says something that isn't appropriate or isn't supportive for what I need right now. And oh, okay, I can either be annoyed at her because she's not reading me correctly. I can be annoyed at myself because I didn't speak up again, even though I've been doing all this work. Or I can be like, oh, I see her and her history. I see me and my history. And
Yeah.
do I have capacity to say something later? Yes or no? Who knows, right?
It sounds like to me, it's like acknowledging our humanness in this process, right? It's like, yeah, at
Yeah.
the end of the
Yeah.
day, we're still human. At the end of the day, I'm still going to stay small in certain circumstances, and maybe later, that'll change. But it's like, yeah, the
Yeah.
grace or the humility, I guess, of just accepting those parts of us because they weren't. I guess it's that validation and the part of me that needs to stay small or that's terrified of being big or being seen also probably didn't get validated very much, like, and it's going
Yeah.
to scream at me until I validate it, right? Like, I think
Yeah.
that's that resistance for me too is around like, um, yeah, like I just think of my child having big feelings and a big moment of dysregulation. Like he just needs somebody to see him, right, and be with him in that moment. And I think of those parts of me in this in a similar vein, right? Like even though they're frustrating, and I wish they would grow up or be better or be different, it's like they actually just need somebody to sometimes sit in the darkness with them too. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
exactly.
And then that
100%.
just, yeah, it's like co-regulation with the self, I guess, when I think about
Yeah.
it, or with that part of
100%.
us, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Should we play with one more little edge?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to invite one more exploration for people. So what we did to start is we kind of just acknowledge like where's the edge where we kind of get uncomfortable and where's this place, this smaller container where we feel safe, and the contrast of in between those two. So we played in those realms, and then we played more in the ancestral rounds of holding space for the bigger picture. And now I want to play a little more with a behavior, so from with a movement and to me there's so much that can show up. Again, I don't work too much with context. When the context comes, when the story and their meaning making comes, that's a huge piece to support the puzzle to come together. Like you said, you had all these pieces come forward, but
Mm.
we're not using a story to explore here. Not that there's anything wrong with this, but what I like about what we're going to do next is we get to just notice what is in the simplicity of the exploration. As soon as we add context, we can get caught up in the details. So that's I'm just want to name that. So if I think about getting small,
Mhm.
I have a response. So let's start with that. Okay.
Mhm.
So when I think about getting small, I have a sigh of relief a little bit. There's like, oh, I don't have to work so hard. It's kind of comfortable here. Um, Yet there's an aloneness and a grieving or maybe a longing for. Maybe it's more a longing than a grieving. But I feel the comfort of it, yet still the aloneness and the longing for something else. That's a really quick, I could go into way more detail, but
Mhm.
what do you notice with this idea of getting smaller?
You know, it's interesting when as soon as you said it, I was like, oh no, I don't want to go back.
I
Like,
like it. Oh yeah. Understandable.
I was like, oh, I've been enjoying the like spaciousness of actually, taking up space and not playing
Uh,
small. It's almost a weird, like a subtle aversion to it now.
I
It's
love
like,
it. That's
oh,
great. Yeah.
I want to go back there. I know that. Like it's so familiar, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in this moment, I'm like, no, I'm not ready to go
I
back.
love it. I love it. So I'll invite people listening to play with it
Mm.
and to notice. I think that's a really awesome response to have because it's your system being like, wait, what was familiar isn't necessarily needed anymore. I'm actually okay in this other state,
Ah, like this feels
right?
pretty safe
Yeah.
too, right? Or just
Yeah.
fun. Maybe fun is the right, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. I love it. So for people listening, you can play with this. Like notice what your response is to getting small, and then we're going to do the opposite. What shows up at the idea of taking up space? And because you're already taking up more space, Julie, there might be another edge where it gets uncomfortable, or there might not be in this moment. We'll see. So we'll do the opposite now to just see, okay, what shows up at the idea of taking up space. For me, I just took a breath.
Yeah.
Wait, it is way nicer out here, even though this feels really comfortable.
It's getting
It's
tight, right?
also like,
Yeah.
ugh.
It's more
Yeah,
oxygen available. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah,
So
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
you go for it.
Um, what's available to me now that I admittedly was not available to me at the start of our conversation is like a weird calm, like I think
Uh-huh.
we're still exploring the edges of that and finding safety in it. But I know it, like it's also this like very present, very like slow, like low tone, I guess if I were to put a name to it. Like it's all good. It's okay. Like
Yeah,
yeah, no rush. And yeah, the thought of it is not as triggering as it
yeah,
was just, 40 minutes ago.
yeah.
So it's a cool place.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So to me, this is neuroplasticity. This is the brain rewiring itself. It went from being programmed in a way where it associated taking up space with scary potential consequences. Don't do it. Right. And having moved through the layers of it, there's more room to be in it. And the programming now is we can take up space and that's actually okay. We feel
Nothing bad
good
happens.
here. We feel
Yeah.
expansive here. Yeah. And there's probably going to be more layers in some of the dynamics, right? The coupling dynamics might show up depending on what's involved in the environment. Like if we put you back on the stage with
On
Oprah.
Oprah stage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Probably won't be the exact same.
Yeah.
You'll have more capacity to be there, but some other layers might show
Yeah.
up, right? And this is what we're doing here is we're playing with reprogramming in a way where it's like, hey, this new thing is now the familiar and the preferred, and it doesn't mean that there aren't edges to that to the next layer exposing itself to where the riskiness shows up, but the programming is now different, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're gonna be
Yeah.
walking through
Cool.
Vancouver just like, hey.
Like singing or like
Yeah. Not a thought, not even like, oh.
no.
Someone
Staying
can cat call you and you'd be like, great.
nothing affects me. No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it also you know what that helps me just in terms of the like fear response, it helps. It's a good reminder for me that it's like it's not permanent. It's like a moment in time. There is a story attached to it. There's a history, there's behavior, there's patterns, but it's like in any given moment, like I can be feeling, sensing, experiencing something completely different. And it actually doesn't take a lot, right? Like,
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah. And it makes the fear seem really kind of small now, right? In a way,
Yeah.
and insignificant. And might get big again, like you said, but like right
Yeah.
now, I'm like, poof, yeah, okay. It's like not getting too attached either to the
Yeah.
like sensation, emotion, story, because
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, it's not a permanent thing, or it doesn't have
Exactly.
to be, right?
It doesn't
Yeah,
have to be. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
There's a different relationship created. A reprogramming has happened, and you're going to be in the world differently, and it doesn't mean that. And my
same
guess
rules don't
is
apply. Yeah,
exactly the same
right.
rules definitely don't apply. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I want to name that for some people with the idea of getting big, something else might have happened because you've navigated some of the layers. There's more room to take up the space. And for others, it might be the idea of taking up space. Boop, in come the coupling
yeah,
dynamics.
distraction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like there's the
Mhm.
fear, there's the hesitation.
Yeah,
And what I want to invite those people to recognize is like when you imagine yourself taking up space, see if you can find that moment where, and if you can't find it by reflecting, this is where the behavior, the movement can happen of like, well, broaden your shoulders, see what it's like to kind of feel yourself broader and you'll notice that shift happen of like, oh, there's that heart rate increase, or there's those eyes darting around, or there's the fear and I really quickly need to get small again. So it's about playing in those realms where you can notice the subtle flavors by playing with these movements
right.
to let your system discover something else is possible, just like Julie did, right? Where it's like, okay, play in these realms where there are these edges, where there's discomfort, just a little bit, so that you can support the reprogramming to happen where your system is no longer coupled with like, "Oop, this equals that." It's like, actually, this taking up space equals I'm okay. I'm safe, I'm seen, I feel connection, I feel like I belong, instead of like, oh, taking up space equals fear, consequences, I'm gonna die, or whatever is currently entangled in
Mhm.
that. So the invitation for those of you who don't have that sense of space yet to see that as a great place to do some exploring. Yeah.
And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong. I guess that would be the only other thing I would say to that, right? Yeah, it's like not to just because I might not be feeling that, it doesn't mean I'm doing something the right way versus the wrong way, right? It's like I could very well be having that response too, and it would be about just validating that as well. That's perfect as
Yeah.
well, right?
Which if we would have done this at the beginning, you probably would have had a
Oh,
response.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
100% had that response. Yeah.
Exactly. We found it in a different way, not just this
Yeah.
like get small, get take
Right.
up space, curl up, expand your shoulders. But yeah, it's like this is the power of this work and how quickly we can move through what we're caught in and change our experience entirely, bit by bit, usually.
Yeah.
Usually
A little
bit
bit
by
of
bit.
alchemy.
Sometimes it's
Yeah.
a big thing. So
Yeah.
you'll see Julie on, Joe Rogan's podcast next week.
Imagine.
Imagine.
I'll be interrupting him and like Googling him and yeah, taking up all kinds of space. I'll be like, Joe,
Totally.
slow down for a minute here. Give some room.
I like this
Yeah.
for you. I like this.
The challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, totally, totally.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anything else you want to add before we wrap up? I feel like there's some good nuggets for people to play with and also to understand the experience a bit more.
I guess maybe just to like name without again giving too much context, but when I think back to like who I was in my childhood and then my youth and up until whenever, I don't know, there's not like one moment, but I was incredibly shy, self-conscious, like, I couldn't even read a book in public, like in a classroom setting, couldn't give oral presentations. Like this, this type of fear and anxiety was crippling for me. And I thought, I created a story around that, that's just the way it is. That's my personality. I was told I was shy and quiet, and I sort of accepted it as a fact. And I guess if there's anything like that I want people to know is that it's not a fact, right? And it's like, not to sell yourself short, think that you can't actually change or take up more space from that. Like that's not a given, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that was pretty well like a given to me until, whatever, however many years ago. So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's so cool to
to
change the
challenge those
belief about
narratives,
yourself.
right? The belief systems that we hold around it or
Yes.
call it personality, right? Like none of that's fixed. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for naming that. That's huge.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
This is
thank you so
fun.
much for, exploring and taking up more space. And if anyone wants some support taking up space, they can reach out to Julie. Might
Yep.
have a wait list, but you never know.
Yeah. If
Sneak
you're
in
looking
there.
for somatic
Yeah.
therapy, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy to help. So thanks, Nicole. This was fun. Thanks for the
Yeah.
invitation and yeah, the
Yeah.
experiential conversation we just had. Was, yeah, I'm left feeling very full and warm and calm. So
Awesome.
yeah.
I just keep getting images of you walking downtown Vancouver, just like strutting your stuff in a way, without strutting, just,
With a
taking up
megaphone?
space.
No,
Yeah. Because, the other end of the spectrum is the strutter
I
and
couldn't
the
go that way.
taking
Well,
up
yeah,
space in a
there's something
very
that
different
happens there too, right? The boomerang effect. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So, I
Awesome.
like this image I have of you
It's
strutting
kind of fun. Yeah.
confidently, not overconfidently,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
in that
Isn't
ease,
that right?
strutting
Because,
with ease.
with
Yeah,
ease. I love it. That's
yeah,
a good word. Yeah.
awesome. Thanks so
Oh,
much, Julie.
oh, that's fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much for listening. I hope that this episode has provided you with new perspectives and insights. And if you haven't already, head to my website to download the experiential guide. Until the next time, I invite you to continue to pause and notice.